With time for 3 more questions, I think the next
Gerard
one.
had a question.
Joe.
Thank you. I'd like to ask this question to both Kishore as well as
No, ask Stefan, please.
yeah, Stefan as well, because I'd like to hear both your views on this point. Actually, it's a point that the lady earlier just mentioned just now. This issue of Taiwan and whether or not either side would shift the consensus or shift the status quo. I think you, Kishore, you feel that the risk is that the West would be the one, or America would be the one that would move the status quo. But how are you so sure that China won't do the same thing? Because as far as I understand, from my little understanding of China, that there is unfinished business for many generations since 1949, that Taiwan has not been reunited with the mainland. And how are you so sure that China is not going to, in its effort to project its progress and project the great revival of the Chinese nation, from what they call it, that they would seek to retake the mainland, whether by force or other means, and that could trigger the war. And I'm asking this as a Singaporean politician because I'm concerned about the peace and security of our region. So I'd like to hear both your views on that.
I mean, it is possible, certainly. I mean, it's possible we may wake up tomorrow morning and we hear that President Xi announces that he's going to invade Taiwan. It's possible, certainly. But if my assessment of how they behave is correct, they do very careful, comprehensive calculations. And one of the biggest questions they ask is, on whose side is time on, right? And the Chinese are shrewd enough students of geopolitics to know that the world will treat China this way when it is number 2. By 2030, China becomes number 1. The world will treat China very differently. There's a huge amount of deference that number 1 gets that number 2 doesn't get, okay? So if that's coming your way, right? And if you watch this, the fruit, it's going to ripen and fall. Why take it now? What's the rush? But if you sense that someone is trying to change the facts on the ground and recognize Taiwanese independence, right? Then they will act. So that's how I think. But they are very careful, rational actors, which is why actually what the Trump administration was trying to do, especially in the last years. Incidentally, there is, I listen to lots of podcasts, okay? I think there was a podcast on Seneca which described that in the last 9 months of the Trump administration, the world went through a very dangerous phase, because until then, even though Trump took actions against China, he was still quite restrained. Trump, actually, to be fair to him, didn't like geopolitical quarrels and so on and so forth. He didn't want to be bothered with those. But after COVID-19 broke out, when Trump realized that COVID-19 was killing his chances for re-election, he became very angry towards China, and he began to talk about China virus and so on and so forth. So all the restraint that Trump personally was applying on the anti-China hawks disappeared in the last 9 months of the Trump administration. And therefore Pompeo, Pence and Pottinger literally ran riot, And that's how the speech that Pompeo gave in the Nixon Library was incredibly inflammatory, against China, because no one stopped him. Now, when things like that begin to happen, then you get dangers. So the good news is that the Biden administration has switched that off and says, we'll be careful on China, and we'll be careful on Taiwan. So if the Chinese have the assurance, why should they act?